Welcome to another episode of Breaking Into Cybersecurity, where today we have Bill Vester.
So it's Sir Bill.
Welcome to another episode of Breaking Into Cybersecurity. Today we have Bill Welster, who will be joining us and sharing his journey into cybersecurity, tips and tricks he has for the next generation, and some of the challenges that he's working on today that we can do to prepare our next generation for what's to come. Bill, why don't you give our audience a little bit of background about yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, by the way. So my career is a little bit all over the place. I started as an officer in the Air Force, got a chemical engineering degree undergrad, and went right into the Air Force building high power chemical lasers to mount on satellites and on the front of 747s. And that was to knock down missiles. So that was really interesting. I went from there and actually entered the cybersecurity space. My second half of my 7 years in the Air Force was spent building classified cyber systems that were used across the globe. Really interesting. I learned a ton about that and the capabilities, the risks, the goods and the bads, how you can develop something with the best intentions and see people use it not the best ways. I left there and went to the Rand Corporation for 10 years. So, Rand being this large nonprofit, policy focused think tank. And I led the engineering and applied sciences department there, which was 300 PhDs in engineering and applied sciences. And then I also had my own research portfolio. And I'd like to think that my research portfolio can just be defined simply as the collision between behavioral science, so human behavior, and advanced technology. So whether that's blockchain or cyber or AI or whatever it might be, there's a lot to learn there about the way humans use technology, understand technology, et cetera. And I joke that after 10 years, I just wanted to get back to building things. And so I entered the startup space and have been in that since about 2018.
So let's take a little bit of a journey there. So in the military, you kind of had some roles focused on that. Do you think that prepared you for what you were ready to see in the world? What commercial organizations were looking for? Or that just provided you with the technical skill set, but now you still had to adapt your career to what commercial organizations were looking for?
That's a really good question. I was in the United States Air Force, and the Air Force is I can speak most authoritatively about the Air Force versus the other branches of the services. But the Air Force is very serious about public private partnership, bringing in industry to inform, to partner around hard, wicked problems. Building lasers and putting them on satellites, like that's necessarily going to get me ready for industry. But the work that I did with my portfolio, I was leading a set of programs focused in the cyberspace that absolutely prepared me for the outside world because I wasn't just building something like a little component of something. I was leading a portfolio that was then going out into use in the field. And so I got a chance to go from the ideation all the way through fielding. And we were in this kind of rapid delivery space where we went from idea to in the field in under 6, 7 months. And so it was fantastic to learn that life cycle and to learn it so quickly. And we did it hand in hand with partners in industry.
Wow, that's pretty fast innovation for the military, even for private corporations to go from zero to MVP in 7 months. So, from a program management perspective, I've often found that candidates within the cyber field overlook this really core component of tying all the pieces together and think, oh, this isn't an interesting role, but really, this is the architectural role that pulls together, hey, we have these requirements over here, we have these controls over here. Now we need to pull everything together to have a functioning system, functioning application, functioning mission delivery system, whatever you look at it. And I think that's often overlooked. What advice do you have for folks that may be wanting to look into this path and why they should potentially reconsider it?
I think that you raised something very important, which is the first thing you should be thinking about when you are building a system, whether you are building a widget within the system or you are architecting the whole thing, is how it's going to come together. So if you're at the widget level, it's like, where do I feed into? What am I working with? What are the edges that I need to be clean so that other aspects of the system can benefit from what my widget is bringing or vice versa? And that kind of system approach, that system knowledge, I think oftentimes it's not the widget maker's fault that they don't have it. It's actually at the programmatic level where that information, that context is not flowed down to the lower level worker. I say that not in a disparaging way, but I'm saying like you have all these subject matter experts who are building the various guts of a system. If they don't have the context about how that all pulls together, then the system isn't going to work as designed or as promised from the get go. And you have major integration problems at that point, far too late in the process. And then it costs a ton more money and a ton more effort to fix and reconcile that. So, one thing is if you're at the kind of worker level, the subject matter expert level, the builder level, demand that you understand the system to the extent that you're not blocked by competitive proprietary kind of things or classification or whatever it might be, but really demand that and expect it, because otherwise have an arm tied behind your back. If you're at the upper level, you don't just need to think about how all these components come together. You need to think about, how's the user going to use it? Right? Because what's the purpose of building a system if the user is going to get it upon delivery and be like, huh? And so, how do you make sure that from a behavior standpoint, from a human understanding standpoint, that those recipients of your system are going to have open arms and say, yes, I've got this thing. I know exactly how to use it. It solves this problem for me. And I can't imagine life previous to this because I didn't have this, right? And now this has just changed everything. So the lower level, you got to get that context and that system knowledge so that you can understand how you're flowing your part into the greater. And at that high level, you need to be thinking not just, does everybody understand things and where are we going system wise, but you also need to be thinking, where are we from a working with our user, meeting our user's requirements?
It's nice. I love how you framed that. Now let's pivot into the next part of your career. You mentioned you left the military. Now you're working with a major think tank and research organization. For those that are interested in research, how does researching the theoretical of cybersecurity and someone that is used to seeing potentially the impacts of cybersecurity, how can you help blend the two together? Because oftentimes there's this, oh, this is the worst case scenario, but then on the ground, we have all these compensating controls. So, how do you help people blend the two together to make an honest assessment of the situation?
So there's two things that I think are very important. And there's many, but there's two things that kind of rise to the top to answer your questions. So the first is you need to talk to the end user as fast as possible. And so if you're going to build something, you need to go and figure out like, what is it that they have? How is this thing fitting into their greater system? What pain point is this solving? Like, we really need to contextualize the work that you're doing. And so at a research level, that doesn't change. You need to go talk to the users. You need to go talk to the people who are using systems right now, who are wishing for other sorts of systems, and understand the fits and starts of what they're doing so that you can then dive into, if you're looking at advanced solutions for a particular area, like make sure that it actually is a solution, right? Make sure that you're actually applying those advanced technologies properly in your research so that when you're actually going about it, what comes out of it is not just a paper that people look at and say, that's interesting, but it's something that they want to use as their playbook, that they want to use as their primer to hand to new employees, to hand to new partners and say, read this, because this is going to tell you why. And it's going to tell you all the important things. And it's based in science, it's based in legitimate cognitive work that's led us to understand why this is important. That's number one. So doesn't change. If you're doing research, you still got to understand who's going to receive that research, understand that audience, and build your research plan toward informing that audience. The second thing is, particularly in the cyber security space, and I would say more broadly, the technology space in general, we tend to leave out the other, and I joke, I say the other ists and ologists, right? Like the behavioral scientists, the political scientists, the economists, the anthropologists, all these other sorts of experts. We don't consult them along the way. And Rand is a fantastic place because they have all those sorts of people. If a degree is delivered or conferred somewhere in the world, Rand's probably got one of them, somebody with one of those degrees. But in most organizations, you may not have an anthropologist or a behavioral economist or whatnot on staff. Well, go find those people, right? And if you're doing research within an organization on an idea and you're trying to prove that idea matters, reach outside the cybersecurity space, those experts, and go talk to somebody who almost knows nothing about it. But when you describe it to them, they can give you context about, okay, but here's why, from a behavioral economics standpoint, this solution with blockchain won't work, blah, 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 or whatever it might be, right? But reach outside your comfort zone and bring in expertise to inform, whether it's research or building, to inform what you're doing.
What are some interesting technologies that you see coming onto the landscape that are going to evolve how current individuals within the talent pool and future individuals coming into the talent pool need to upskill and provide these skills and capabilities to organizations looking for them?
So I'm not sure if it's a technology. I'm not sure how to answer with a technology as much as everyone in this space needs to be proficient with where the current larger technology field is. So, what are LLMs doing as an example? What are people doing with blockchain? How are people treating, even more broadly, just a distributed ledger? What are people doing with cryptography? All that sort of stuff. So, stay current is the first thing. And that takes a little bit of work, right? Oh my gosh, I've got to go read some articles. I've got to listen to some podcasts or whatever it might be, but stay current. I think the most important skill set going forward is going to be the QA manager, the quality control person, or the quality assurance person, because so many people are using Claude or using these other systems to program, whether it's a native application or a security solution. And let me tell you, that code that's coming out of there is flawed, right? It requires a human in the loop, whether we like it or not. And maybe someday it won't, but I like to think that it always will, because we have the ability to context switch. Our brains have the ability to think about things that are very different from a perspective of training. You can't necessarily train a system at this point. And now I'm going to have everybody from OpenAI turn off the discussion, right? Oh, of course we can do that. But it's really hard. So the QA is so important. And if you have within your tool set that QA tool set, I think you'll be employable for quite some time. If you're lacking that, go get it, go build it.
I see that challenge when it comes to troubleshooting, but I think the skill and capability of troubleshooting is going down that same path of disappearing because everyone is focused around enabling themselves through the use of AI without potentially understanding the fundamentals of the technology underneath. So when they get a given output, they can't really gauge for themselves the level of quality being given, and they assume that it's right, it's perfect, there's no flaws in it, go push it to production. And that's one of the challenges that, from a development perspective, that I always have to teach for just safety and awareness. Hey, review this. From maturity perspective, do you see organizations really prepared to deploy AI across their enterprise systems in general?
So in 2018, sat at the AI summit in San Francisco, and it was fun. I ran a booth there. I was actually sponsored by Cognizant, and it was like a Tonight Show setup where I was
Mhm.
interviewing executives from all the tech leads out there. So Microsoft and Google, and they were talking about AI and how they're using AI. And really what they were doing was RPA, right? They were just making things faster that were already known. And that's great from efficiency standpoint, but
Mhm.
they really weren't embracing AI at that point. Now let's fast forward 5 years. All of a sudden, LLMs are on the scene, and the power that they bring, whether it's accurate or 80% accurate, it doesn't matter. The power that they bring is insane.
Mhm.
And so now organizations are scurrying to figure out, how the heck do I do something with this? How do I bring this in? And how do I do that so it doesn't tank my organization? It doesn't tank my annual recurring revenue, those sorts of things.
Mhm.
And I'm not convinced. So I wasn't convinced in 2018 that like these large companies were really doing anything with respect to AI proper on a day-to-day implementation. At this point, I think it's really hard when you get outside the specific technology companies, so the Googles of the world, the Anthropics of the world, et cetera, and you get out more to, I don't know, Lowe's and Home Depot or Coca-Cola and Pepsi or whatever. It's just companies that are just outside, but they could benefit from efficiencies. They could benefit from better systems that could be directed by AI. I think it's really hard to think about how to bring that in at an enterprise level because there's a whole risk assessment there that we don't have heuristics for. What is the risk of implementing an AI system to my bottom line? Because I better not figure that out after it's tanked my bottom line. And so,
Exactly.
and so for me, it's a really interesting tension right now. And I think the technology proper world needs to be thinking about this, right? Okay, great. GPT-5 comes out. What does that mean for the general enterprise manager out there who's trying to use tools like this? Put that into context for me and give me some risk heuristics for how I might want to think about the fact that this thing might not be perfect. And this
Yeah.
is the hubris in technology allows us to wave that off, but it's something that's so critical.
I think as you look at the risks holistically, one of the fundamental risks that often gets overlooked is access to data and managing human and non-human identities within the scale of AI or agentic tools, and organizations truly not being prepared for the level of access that their legacy systems have traditionally left on their data files.
Mhm.
Because we've always operated with a moat and high wall approach where we put firewalls up, we put strong technical controls up, but then once you get in, your file share has everyone in the company can read all these files. Now you put an agentic AI into this. If Bill can read all these files, so can this agent. And if you didn't mean for this agent to now be able to read HR files that you would never expect Bill to read, now they have quicker, easier access to analyze and to output this. And From a risk perspective, you never consider that. From PR perspective or an internal relations perspective, you didn't want your stakeholders knowing the salary of everyone employed at your organization. So I think these are the things that often go overlooked is these, we call them the fundamentals or the foundations for data governance and protection. And because they're hard, people like skip past them because they just want to implement the technology.
Yeah, you are nailing it. So this idea that, people think about garbage in, garbage out. You hear that all the time for AI. You put in garbage, you get out garbage. But what happens when you put in like really quality enterprise level data that's just been mistagged or that, isn't well protected and someone queries your system because you've made it possible for them to do their job and they get access to that sort of stuff that you just referenced. And that you don't know that until it's happened. It's really very difficult for one to go through and say, okay, it's just complicated and it's drudgery to go through and be like, okay, what is the risk that this part of the system, let me look at all the controls around this type of data. No one's doing that. They're actually probably training an agent to do that, which is even scarier, right? Like to me, that's absolutely terrifying. But companies will learn this and individuals will learn this too. We're in a world now in the past 10 months where everything I put into one of these LLMs, if I'm not running it locally, I should expect that to show up at some point,
Yeah, correct. I
right?
had this
Like, I mean,
conversation with someone that I supported, and they put a company file into an LLM, and because it wasn't connected to their corporate email, I'm like, if a known threat actor is trying to target this organization, they could put together your personal email and stuff that you put into Claude, Anthropic, whatever, tie it together and piece together the puzzle if they're that determined to get into the organization. If you don't have a protected system, you have to operate like you can just ask vague questions, but even asking vague questions to a skilled threat actor, they could put together by you asking this question and this question, you're asking about these types of vulnerabilities and how to mitigate them. You might have these types of vulnerabilities in your organization. And if this data is fresh enough, I could take action on that. But this is fast forwardly thinking for organizations that can't even react right now to like patch management within 3 months of high vulnerability, thinking that they have to react to how to address new agentic tools or agentic services that are coming on the market every week, every day becomes a whole different risk equation that many organizations don't know how to think about. And you're like, we want to help your people do the job that they want to do. But if they don't tell us what tools they need to enable themselves, and we can help them do that in a secure way, like within the walls of one of your cloud environments, locally on your machine, something like that, then then there's a possibility that whatever they put in, like you mentioned, can end up being indexed on Grok or
yeah.
on Google, or even being subpoenaed by the New York Times because everything requested via OpenAI is searchable.
Yeah, this is one of the things where the adoption, if we go back in time, and Jared Diamond wrote this book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, and you look at the adoption of technology, kind of civilization changing things, right? And you look at how long that used to take. And then he progresses along and we go to the different ages, right? You get to the industrial age and blah, 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 blah. And it's shortening, it's shortening.
Mm-hmm.
And I would posit, although I've done no research to say this with any sort of certainty, but I would posit at this point that we've flipped over to where it isn't that the time is just so short toward adoption. It's almost like we adopted before we even understood what we had in our hands. And so it
Yeah,
wasn't we
I'd
just
agree with that.
understood and adopted quickly.
I'd agree with that.
And I don't mean, oh my gosh, and let me go sit in the corner because I'm so afraid. But instead, it's like people should pay attention because this is how do you work backwards from that? If you're in the cybersecurity space and you have agentic systems working within your organization, and you're like, okay, this is so complicated. I'm just going to build an agent that supervises them or whatever. And then somebody else in your organization is, oh, there's a lot of things over here. I'm going to put a supervisor over the supervisor, right? All of a sudden, how do you unravel that when something bad goes on, right? And so the last thing I would add to my istenologist thing is, yeah, you're going to need to bring in lawyers. You're going to need to bring in counsel. You're going to need to bring in people who understand the current state of not only risk, but also legal liability.
I was just going to bring up that point. Like, outside of the cybersecurity space, as businesses enable AI and agentic tools, when it comes to understanding the bias in the training data, the bias in the decisioning models, the audiologists have not gone through and dissected the models that you're likely putting into production to validate that there are no biases in there. They likely haven't red teamed or QA'd the chatbot that you're about to put live on your website to ensure that it's not going to violate any privacy concerns or any legal or regulatory compliance. You might just put it out there because, oh, yeah, looks like it's working and it's not going to give back, say, someone's social security number. Great. Let's put it up there.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering, and again, I don't mean to be like the harbinger of, oh my gosh, but I'm wondering when we're going to care. Because so the company that I have right now, it's called Lotic, and it's focused on what we call artificial relational intelligence. And
Hmm.
so really it's the last mile of AI toward human engagement. And so how do you make the engagement such that the user doesn't need to prompt the AI? The AI is acting as if it's another individual. So there's a back and forth, there's active listening, there's all these sorts of things. I started my company with behavioral scientists, didn't start it with software engineers. And this had the point, I promise. So we put this out there and it's secure. Everybody has their own database. So if you're one of my users, you have your own database. That database is cryptographically secured using, yes, blockchain, but also a few other tricks and tools that I've built along the way and implemented with some experts. And we put it out there, and it's easier to go to ChatGPT and deal with an issue that way instead of use this system that is private, secure, ethical, etc. Like, when are we going to care as a populace that our use of this easy thing that's available is maybe more risky than this thing that seems like it's on the edge? What are we going to say that's a must have?
I think that's a loaded question. And I think the answer would be it depends. And it depends where in the world you are. I would say, for example, in Europe, it's faster because they're now starting to unravel oh, it's on the internet, therefore you don't have any control over it, where individuals are now having protection over their self image and their representation of themselves on the internet, in addition to all the privacy requirements there. In the US, I think right now, based on our current leadership, compliance to these things has been going the opposite way, unfortunately, but there could be a swing in future variations because I think right now they're looking just to push AI into everything, thinking that they can enable and fast track utilization and production and scale their industrial strength. But without, like you mentioned in the beginning, without really understanding the use case, the implications behind it, there are serious ethical, moral, and security concerns to that.
Yeah, let's just say within the past handful of years, I was on a panel with two elected officials. And I'm not going to state where it was because I really don't want to identify who those people were.
That's okay.
But we were talking about the emergence of AI, cryptography, all these things that cybersecurity experts, people in the cybersecurity field are thinking about all the time. And these people were getting up talking about the policy. How do you put policies in place for quality and ethics and proper use and all this? I was giving them a primer on the way onto that panel because the package of information that they'd been given from their staffers was garbage. And part of me is, okay, great. Who's informing those people who are making decisions about regulation? How can we expect someone, say in the House of Representatives in the US, who is elected every 2 years? So basically, by the time they're elected, they're thinking about the next election. How can we expect for them to onboard this information about technology such that they understand it so deeply that they actually demand things of regulatory rules, compliance? What are the penalties for not meeting those things? Because I do believe that, and it was the case with these two individuals, they wanted to know, but no one was there to tell them. And they're not like cyber experts, they're not AI experts. And so we're in this weird space where, yeah, adopt new technology because it's going to really help us and put it in place and blah, 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 blah. But nobody's raising their hand being like, do we really know how that's going to affect things like federal programs and state programs and local programs? And I'm not talking about like basic, I don't know, tax law.
Or
Like,
hiring or
yeah, right.
managing employee relations and performance management and all these things that we have some automation in the system, but they want to tweak and improve the automation without understanding how AI is going to have implications in that. And from an HR perspective, we've seen studies where underrepresented individuals get flagged and removed from the candidate process extremely quickly because of their name, their background, and the schools that they've gone to, because the data that the AI was trained on saw these names, schools, backgrounds as being a minority and therefore not the best representation of a future solution, and therefore pulling them out of the candidate pool. And then even for the overly qualified, if they don't put in the right keywords and the right terminology in their resume, they get kicked too because they didn't word it just the way that the job description was written and therefore didn't hit all the contextual keywords needed for it to raise them up in the process. And I think these are challenges like that we need to tackle from everywhere from hiring to management, because those are the places that you're going to put it in faster. How do we make budget decisions? How do we make performance decisions? Healthcare organizations. How do we make healthcare and benefits decisions? How do we make denial decisions? Everyone's saying, oh, we had a human review it or a doctor review it, but can we prove that? Can we prove
Right.
that their AI system really wasn't the one behind it that made that decision? And then they just flagged the human to review it and stamp that off? We don't know, but these are the implications that we need to understand as a society.
Yeah. And there's so many things. I have a book coming out in October, the third. It's broken into three sections. It's called The Story Economy. And part of it is very economic focused about what do we do instead of a universal basic income? Like, how do we think about how people are going to make money going forward with this kind of world of agentic systems that we're in? But one of the things that I do mention at the end is you've got to label when AI is involved, first of all, because I think a lot of times people don't realize where it was involved in some point in the value chain, at some point in the process. There's some labeling that's required. And then also, you need to be able to put in place the ability to have knowledge as to why those decisions were made. So basically, so that you can go back and you can check audit, etc., what happened. Because right now, that's the problem, right? Like the system told us this, it feels weird. Why did it make that decision? But the system told us this. So I've got this like automation bias thing where it's like, Peter told me this, so it must be right. And that's somewhat frustrating. I'm going to break for once. I have about 5 minutes left and then I've got to
Okay, perfect.
go.
Let's go with the last question then. Okay, Bill, with the last couple minutes, any final words, tips, tricks that you would give to our audience listening today?
I think that one of the biggest things I'm finding is that people who are in the cybersecurity space, people who are in the software engineering space are looking over their shoulder right now and being like, oh my gosh, I thought I was safe. And now there's these agentic systems that are coming at me. Claude is out there and it's able to program in a way that everybody's celebrating. But they're celebrating at the high level. It's not perfect. So I think the advice I would give is don't run with your hair on fire yet. Actually dig in, learn how to use those tools effectively, and then teach the people around you who are not experts how those tools can best be used and keep the human in the loop for almost everything. And I don't mean that to be arduous and protect your job. That's not the point. The point is like every company that keeps a human in the loop, every company that is using these tools appropriately and with knowledge about where they belong and where they don't will succeed. Those who are haphazardly using them right now, those who are saying like, hey, we don't need our developer. I'm going to go ahead and fire half my developers. And thus the developers are looking over their shoulders and being like, wait, am I next? Those companies will end up failing. And so if you're in this space, definitely learn the new tools. Definitely think about ways in which you distinguish yourself. So we talked about QA before, but don't look over your shoulder just yet. Instead, look in front of you and say, okay, where is this going? How do I use these new tools and how do I incorporate them into the best practices that I've learned throughout my career, whether my career's been 2 years or 30 years? And I'll tell you, the 30-year veterans, they're scared, right? How can I keep doing my job? Like I'm gonna be replaced. Let me tell you, like a lot of those enterprise systems that are out there right now, they're not beautifully set up to accept the most advanced technology solutions out there. So there's gonna need to be experts who can tie those things together. And so focus on that and don't focus on, oh my gosh, like looking over my shoulder and wondering, am I next? Show your value in these ways.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you for joining us on this podcast today.
Thank you. I appreciate you. It was a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it.